you guys are good to go. And all lost will be at 4:56. So have a good round. Good luck, everyone.
All right, calling case number CV 201012448, Petrillo versus Harper Martini and Peony Estates. Is the plaintiff ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, is the defense ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
Any pretrial matters before we begin?
Yes, Your Honor. Maybe start with introductions?
Of course.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Julia Ferrin, and today, along with my co-counsel, Meghna Melcote.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
And Alec Grevin.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
We collectively represent the estate of Genesis Petrillo in today's case. Your Honor, there's just a few housekeeping matters that the plaintiff would like to attend to.
All right, let's let defense introduce themselves first, then I'll come back to you.
Yes, Your Honor.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. May we make appearances?
You may.
My name is Cameron Metz, and today I'm joined by my two co-counsel who will introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Catherine Lamerson.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Kayla Gronick.
Good afternoon. Defense, I'll come back to you in a second, but I want to hear about the pretrial matters from plaintiff first.
Yes, Your Honor.
Your Honor, the plaintiff would like to invoke Rule 603 and Rule 615, the constructive swearing in and constructive sequestration of all witnesses.
Any objection from the defense?
No, Your Honor.
All right, so allowed.
Your Honor, we would also like to let you know that our attorneys and witnesses will be removing their masks once our teammates leave the room.
Understood.
And Your Honor, we would like to ask if we can screen share both exhibits and visual aid during today's virtual trial.
You can screen share when you're at the point where you start to show the document to the witness. Just make clear for the record when you're showing it to me as the presiding judge and when you're asking to show it to the jury.
Yes, Your Honor. And with that, any objections and evidentiary issues, can those be heard constructively outside the ears of the jury?
I'm going to ask that you request to be heard outside the ears of the jury when you don't want them to hear your argument.
Yes, Your Honor. And lastly, we just wanted to let Your Honor know that we're using one camera for our attorneys today. So if in between examinations, we could have a few moments to switch out attorneys and change our names so that's reflected correctly on the Zoom.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Your Honor. And with that, the plaintiff is ready to proceed.
Defense, any pretrial matters?
Yes, Your Honor. Just a couple pretrial matters. First, before trial, we have discussed with plaintiff's counsel that given our online venue, if either of us have any technical difficulties, we're going to be as reasonable as possible when stopping time for statements, directs, and crosses.
Yes, Your Honor. Plaintiff is okay with that.
Great. Glad to hear that.
Now, along with that, if at any time we do have video or audio interruptions, please let us know.
I will. Thank you.
Now, second, we also plan on using a number of documents throughout the proceedings. For that, we just planned on using the screen share setting as well.
Yeah, I'll just ask that you do the same thing that I requested of the plaintiff, just to make it known for the record who exactly you're sharing it with, and request when you want to show it constructively to the jury.
Yes, Your Honor. Furthermore, we'd like the court to take notice of stipulation number 3, which states that exhibits 1 through 10 have already been entered into evidence, both stipulated to their authenticity and admissibility.
All right, the bench has taken notice. However, I would like for you to remind me as we go through what once those come up, because balancing between all the different things on the computer, it's going to be hard for me to keep track of that.
Of course. Last, along with the invoked Rule 615, which opposing counsel has invoked, we do not have any objection to that, like I mentioned before. However, we do have a party representative with us, Harper Martini, who will be able to see the testimony of other witnesses.
Yes, Harper Martini may stay non-sequestered for the trial.
With that, Your Honor, we're ready to proceed.
All right, plaintiff has the floor for opening statement.
Yes, Your Honor, thank you.
Ready to proceed? Harper Martini needed control. On June 9th, 2019, Genesis Petrillo and Casey Soto were preparing for the greatest day of their life. It was the night before their wedding. They were at a rehearsal dinner where they were surrounded with their friends, with their family. There were drinks, there was dancing, and it was a happy moment. But later in the night, things changed. Genesis Petrillo ended up being rushed to the hospital, where she slipped into a coma and died. Today, we will be taking a step back, looking exactly how such a tragedy could have occurred. You see, that answer lies in the fact that not everyone was happy that wedding night. Harper Martini was the father of Casey Soto and soon to be in-law of Genesis Petrillo. Harper Martini dreaded the wedding between Casey Soto and Genesis Petrillo. He viewed it as a loss of control, a threat to his daughter's well-being, and a threat to his business. And so what you will learn in today's case is that Harper Martini decided to seize control that night, took matters into his own hands, took a wine bottle, and filled it with pesticide and presented that toxic substance to Miss Petrillo. She drank it thinking it was a gift and later died. That is why the plaintiff is bringing a suit against Harper Martini today in today's case. What you'll see is that today's case revolves around three elements. First, there was the painful relationship between Harper Martini and Genesis Petrillo. We're going to be calling Angel Rodriguez, the best friend of Genesis Petrillo, that's going to testify about this relationship, about how much Harper Martini was threatened by Genesis Petrillo, and how he viewed the marriage between Genesis and Casey Soto to be a loss of control. And so Harper Martini formed a plan. You'll hear from Lonnie Paris today, who's an investigative journalist, how he went in to Peony Estates and saw an offer of Harper Martini of $300,000 to Genesis Petrillo to call off the wedding and leave. But that offer was refused. And when it was, Harper Martini decided to seize control. Lonnie Paris is going to testify about how he saw a lone wine bottle, which Harper Martini had access to, and an empty can of pesticide. He also saw Harper Martini present that bottle of wine to Genesis Petrillo the night of the wedding. And then there's the poison. We're going to be having Dr. Kwan, a foremost expert in toxicology, come and speak to you about the horrible effects of the poison. Dr. Kwan is going to explain exactly how the pesticides were toxic, how it cut her breath short, how it forced her into a coma where she would slip out of consciousness and die. Pain, a plan, and poison. You see, in today's case, you will learn a lot about Harper Martini's relentless quest for control. But there is one thing that Harper Martini cannot control in today's case. That is your verdict. We are asking you here today to find Harper Martini liable. Thank you.
Thank you. The floor is for the defense.
May I proceed?
You may.
May it please the court, counsel, members of the jury. We just don't know. On June 7th, 2019, Genesis Petrillo was at her rehearsal dinner with her fiance, Casey Soto, at Peony Estates, a winery and bed and breakfast right here in Midlands, owned by Harper Martini, Casey's father. Genesis and Casey were supposed to get married the next day. But that night took a turn, and after an evening of drinking, Genesis Petrillo was admitted to River Valley Hospital in Midlands with symptoms of potential alcohol poisoning. Genesis was vomiting, was having trouble walking, and exhibited the classic signs of alcohol poisoning. As the night progressed, Genesis' symptoms got worse until she slipped into a coma and died. When tragedies like these happen, it's understandable to want answers. It's understandable to look for an explanation as to why someone died so suddenly and so tragically the night before their wedding. It's understandable to create a story in order to place the blame on someone or something. Opposing counsel did just that. They told you a story, gave you an explanation for what happened. A story that implicates Harper Martini as the mastermind of a scheme to kill his child's fiancée by poisoning wine. Members of the jury, you'll learn today that that story just isn't true. Harper Martini will come before you himself and tell you that it's not true. But you'll also learn that that story can't be true because there's too much information we just don't know. In Midlands, in order for Harper Martini to be found liable for battery, the plaintiff must prove 3 elements. First, an act was committed. Second, the act intended to cause harm. And third, the act did in fact cause harm. Members of the jury, the plaintiff won't be able to meet that burden today because there's too much information, too many questions, whose answers we just don't know. Today, you'll hear from a woman named Blair Osborne. She's the party planner in Midlands who was in charge of organizing Casey and Genesis's wedding. Blair Osborne was at the rehearsal dinner on June 7th, 2019, and she'll tell you that she saw Genesis Petrillo drinking throughout the evening, up until the moment Blair Osborne left the venue around midnight. You'll also hear from Dr. Richard Cannon, an expert toxicologist. Dr. Cannon will tell you that he can't conclusively say that Genesis died from pesticide poisoning because there's a chance that Genesis died from alcohol poisoning instead. Dr. Cannon will tell you that because we just don't know Genesis Petrillo's peak blood alcohol content that night, there's a chance that she died from alcohol poisoning. You'll also hear from Harper Martini himself. He'll tell you about his relationship with Genesis, and you'll learn that even though they didn't get along all the time, Harper would never hurt his son Casey by harming Genesis. And at the end of today's trial, after hearing all that testimony, you may still have questions, and that's okay. There are a lot of questions in this case whose answers we just don't know. But I want you to focus on 3 important questions throughout the course of today's trial. 1, what was Genesis Petrillo's peak blood alcohol content that night? 2, when was the bottle of wine contaminated with pesticides? And 3, how, if at all, was the bottle of wine contaminated with pesticides? Members of the jury, at the end of today's trial, I'm confident that you will know as well as I do that the answers to those questions are simple. We just don't know. And because we just don't know the answers to those 3 important questions, and because the plaintiff won't be able to answer them for you either, at the end of today's trial, my co-counsel, Ms. Gronick, will come before you, and she'll ask you to find Harper Martini not liable for battery. Thank you.
Thank you. And my co-judges, if you guys need it, if I'm moving a little too quick in between examinations, please let me know. Is the plaintiff ready to proceed with their case in chief?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Angel Rodriguez to the stand.
All right, you may proceed.
Please introduce yourself to the court.
Hi, my name is Angel Rodriguez.
And what do you do for a living, Ms. Rodriguez?
Well, I'm a kindergarten teacher to about 30 of my closest little friends. This job is so rewarding, but it's also exceptionally tiring. I can only deal with so many temper tantrums over not being able to eat glue because it looks yummy. I mean, thanks to COVID, I have even more reason not to eat. Not to eat it or advise against that. You see, before I could just take a glue stick away from a child, and now I have to entice them back to the screen. I always used to tell Genesis about the wacky stories the kids would come up with.
Why are you here today?
I'm here because my best friend Genesis Petrillo died the morning of her wedding.
How do you know Ms. Petrillo?
Well, I met Genesis and Casey a few years back at what became our favorite restaurant, and it was there that they asked me to be their maid of honor.
And from what you saw, how would you describe Ms. Petrillo's and Mr. Soto's relationship?
Gosh, they were just the couple that you thought would be together forever. Like nothing else would make sense. Although there was always issues with Casey's parent, Harper.
What do you mean by issues?
Well, wedding planning was going perfectly fine up until Harper got involved, and then no one could agree on anything.
Were you involved in planning the wedding?
As maid of honor, of course I was.
And how was that?
Also an interesting process. I really like the ideas that Genesis and Harper gave, but the more time I spent around Harper, the more I realized how toxic and complicated Harper and Genesis's relationship was.
What do you mean by toxic and complicated?
Harper didn't really like Genesis, and it all just kind of culminated at the rehearsal dinner.
Let's talk about that rehearsal dinner. How were Ms. Petrillo and Mr. Martini acting that night?
They were fighting all night long. I even heard Mr. Martini Harper say that Genesis should just leave and save the family the heartache. Otherwise, he would make her disappear.
How did Ms. Petrillo react to that?
Look, she was startled by it, was shaking and looking around, and even said that she was afraid that Harper was going to kill her if she wasn't careful.
And did you see Mr. Martini after this incident?
I did. I saw him with a pesticide canister, and when I asked him about it, all he said was that it was for Genesis because Genesis was such a pest. Look, I immediately implemented the buddy program and tried to keep my eyes on Genesis for the night.
And how was Mr. Martini's behavior over the course of the rest of the evening?
Well, after the toast, he took a shift. He was all of a sudden very, very nice to Genesis, which was a welcoming surprise. He even gave us our own bottle of wine from his vineyard, but he gave Genesis her own bottle that was different from everyone else. That was the bottle Cara.
And did Miss Petrillo drink from that Cara wine?
Yeah, she poured herself a glass and even offered me a few sips.
Did you notice anything about Ms. Petrillo's behavior after drinking the wine?
Not at first, but honestly, I have no idea how she drank it. It was disgusting. It tasted like one of the potions that my kindergartners have made with flowers and dirt. I mean, thanks to COVID, I have even more reason not to drink that. But Genesis had a few glasses of it.
And what about as the night went on?
Well, about 45 minutes after, I noticed that something was very, very wrong. She was stumbling and looked really sick. I've never seen her like that before.
And what happened after you saw Ms. Petrillo acting strangely?
Well, look, I've seen kids and adults alike stumble. I mean, an adult is virtually the same as a 5-year-old with enough alcohol, but Genesis never was. And these actions were so out of character. I've never seen her act like this.
And so what did you do?
I tried to watch her and everything, and then she passed out. And so I tried to get her back to her room so that I could watch her. And then she started puking and getting even worse. So I called 911 at 12:42, and they came and they rushed us to the hospital.
What happened at the hospital?
Genesis, she was rushed into the ER, and the doctors were with her all night. And then they came out in the morning at 8 a.m. and said that she had slipped into a coma that was likely due to poisoning.
What happened after that?
I immediately needed to go back to Peony Estate to tell Harper and Casey about this.
And did you see Mr. Martini?
Yeah, when I first got there, I ran into Mr. Martini, Harper, and he asked me if Genesis had been poisoned.
Ms. Rodriguez, did you tell Mr. Martini or Mr. Soto about Miss Petrillo?
No, I hadn't said anything to anybody. I mean, I was the only one at the doctor's office when the doctors told me about the poisoning.
Ms. Rodriguez, what happened after that?
I found Casey and we rushed to the hospital, but we were too late. Genesis had passed away by the time we got there.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Cross-exam?
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. Rodriguez. Can you see and hear me all right?
Yes, I can see and hear you just fine.
You weren't required to testify today, were you, Ms. Rodriguez?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I didn't hear you too well.
You weren't required to testify here today?
No, I was not forced to testify here today.
You wanted to testify here today because you wanted to testify against Mr. Martini. Is that true?
I was here because I want to see justice carried out.
Since your friend, Miss Petrillo, passed away, you'd agree that you've actually spent as much time as possible doing what you consider to be bringing Mr. Martini to justice, right?
I mean, if that means coming to testify to court, I think that's what it means. And look, I just want to make sure that every piece of evidence is given to the court. And I was with Genesis almost the entire night.
Ma'am,
Oh,
I'm just asking.
I'm sorry.
Yes, I characterized that correctly.
I'm sorry. Yes, I'm here to testify today in court.
Now, you told us about what you saw and overheard the evening of that wedding rehearsal and the morning after, but we can agree that you were drinking heavily the evening of that wedding rehearsal, weren't you?
Yeah, I had a few drinks. I mean, it was the night before the wedding, so yeah.
Actually, Miss Rodriguez, we can agree you don't remember exactly how many drinks you had that night.
No, I didn't count my drinks, but I was perfectly competent and capable.
Ma'am, wouldn't you agree that you thought you had enough to drink that you were still intoxicated after 8 a.m. the next morning?
Look, I had a few drinks, but I was still very capable and I knew what was happening. I didn't even get close to blacking out.
Ma'am, I'm not asking you to characterize your experience. I'm trying to figure out how much you had to drink that night.
Exactly. And I'm sorry. I thought I was answering.
I'm going to ask both the witness and attorney to allow the other person to finish talking before moving on, please.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Rodriguez, can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can.
Now, we can agree that while you don't know exactly how many drinks you had that night, you do know you had enough to drink that you thought you were still intoxicated after 8 a.m. the next morning. True?
Yeah, we finished pretty late, so I was still a little bit tipsy by the time I woke up.
Now, like yourself, you know that Miss Petrillo was drinking during that wedding rehearsal.
Yeah, she was drinking a little bit.
Now, you weren't watching Miss Petrillo the entire evening, right?
No, not the my eyes were not glued to her the entire night.
Right, so you just don't know exactly how much Miss Petrillo had to drink that night.
Well, I know that she had a few glasses of wine, but that's about all I know.
Because that's all you saw. You can't tell us if she had more than that.
I did not see her drink any more than that. And I was with her pretty much the entire night.
Now, you told us that you also saw Mr. Martini carrying a canister of pesticides that night, true?
Yes. Yes, I did.
You even told us that he said it was for Genesis because Genesis is such a pest.
He did say that.
But ma'am, he didn't stop there. Immediately after making that statement, Mr. Martini actually told you that that was a joke, didn't he?
Look, I understand that it was a joke, but it still didn't land, and it doesn't negate the fact that he said it in the first place.
Ma'am, I'm not asking you if you thought that it landed, just that he said that that was a joke.
Yeah, but I was still freaked out by the comment.
And after he told you that that was a joke, he then explained that the pesticide was for a cockroach problem. True?
Yeah, he did.
Now, you mentioned that Ms. Petrillo actually offered you a few sips of that bottle of Cara wine, right?
Yes, and it really didn't taste good.
And because you didn't like the taste, you actually spit it out, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
So, ma'am, to be clear, you never actually consumed any of that Cara wine.
No, I couldn't consume any of that.
If that bottle of wine had been contaminated by pesticides, well, you just don't know when that happened, do you?
I mean, I saw Harper earlier with a pesticide canister go into the back room where the wine was, but I can't say for sure. I wasn't there.
And ma'am, you also never saw Harper Martini put pesticides in that bottle of wine.
No, I never saw anything like that.
Thank you. I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. I just ask that my witness is able to step down from the stand.
Ms. Rodriguez, you are excused. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much, Your Honor.
Does the plaintiff have another witness?
Yes, Your Honor. One moment, please. Just retrieving the next attorney from the room.
Take as much time as you need.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Your Honor, are we ready to proceed?
All right, floor is yours.
The plaintiff calls Lonnie Paris to the stand. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Lonnie Paris.
What do you do for a living, Mr. Paris?
I work as an investigative journalist.
How did you get involved with investigative journalism?
Well, I guess it goes all the way back to when my dad used to read me these stories, the Hardy Boys, you know? They'd go out solving mysteries, and I knew I wanted to solve mysteries like them, but the real ones. So I decided to become an investigative journalist.
How did you become involved in today's story?
Well, I was investigating Peony Estates after a news tip I had gotten when I witnessed a huge fight in the near the wine bottling area and between Harper Martini and Genesis Petrillo. That same night, Genesis ended up dead.
Who is Harper Martini?
Oh, Harper Martini is the owner of Peony Estates.
So you mentioned that you witnessed a fight at Peony Estates. How did you end up getting to that area?
Well, during the course of my investigation, I knew I had to get to the more restricted sections. So I put myself in disguise and got to the wine bottling area. That was the first step.
Objection, Your Honor, as to lack of foundation to how this witness got to the bottling area with the disguise and what exactly that would mean.
Response?
Your Honor, the witness said that he entered the bottling area. He's very clearly testifying. He's provided all the necessary foundation. He does not have to detail that I walked to the bottling area or the exact steps, the exact doors that he opened to get into the bottling area. If opposing counsel believes that this is an important point, they can bring it up on cross. But I think the witness has more than laid sufficient foundation.
Yeah, I'm going to overrule now, but Mr. Metz, feel free to cross-examine when we get to that point.
Now, Mr. Paris, you said that you entered the wine bottling area. Did you find anything in there?
Yes. Upon entering the wine bottling area, I searched around for anything, and when I stumbled across a single bottle of Cara wine alone on its shelf, I was confused because in such a vast winery with bottles all over the place, what set this one apart?
And so you saw this single bottle of wine. What'd you do next?
Well, I was going to keep investigating when I heard shouting coming from the other room in an angry argument of sorts.
Do you know who was shouting?
Absolutely. I recognized the voice of Harper Martini. He was clearly shouting. And the other voice I struggled with a little bit until later that night. I heard it again, and I was able to conclude that it was Genesis Petrillo.
So do you know who that second person was arguing with Harper Martini?
Yes, it was Miss Genesis Petrillo.
Now, you said you heard this argument between Miss Petrillo and Mr. Martini. Did you end up going to investigate this argument?
Absolutely. I figured that it was worth looking into, so I made my way over to where I'd heard the shouting. But unfortunately, all that was left there was a crumpled up note on the ground by the time I got there.
Do you know what this note was?
Absolutely. I picked it up and read it, and after realizing what I'd seen, I thought I'd take a picture of it.
Now, what'd you do once you took that picture of the note?
Well, I heard someone coming back, and I was worried about it, so I carefully replaced the note where it was and hid to cover myself.
And what happened after you hid yourself?
Harper Martini returned. He picked up the note that I had placed on the ground, and he said, "I forgot that after Genesis threw this back into my face, I should get rid of it."
And what happened after Mr. Martini talked about getting rid of that note?
He went to the furnace and he burnt it.
Now, Mr. Paris, I want to take a step back to the note itself. Were you able to read it?
Yes, I read just a little bit of it, but I was able to take a picture so I could read it all later. And after reading about it, I knew I'd stumbled across something big.
Do you know who wrote the note?
It was Harper Martini. He clearly wrote it. I'd stumbled across his handwriting earlier in my investigation.
Your Honor, as to lack of foundation may be heard.
You may.
We need to see how this witness knows that that handwriting on the note was the same as Harper Martini's. Moreover, just because the witness thinks that it looks similar to writing he's seen before doesn't mean it was Harper himself. We need to have that foundation laid on the record, something along the lines that Harper admits this, or if he had actually seen Harper writing those words down.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor. So the standard that opposing counsel is laying is not what's required under the rules of evidence. This witness can testify to his rationally based perceptions. He said he was familiar with Harper Martini's writing in the past, and that it looked exactly the same as to what was on the letter. Pursuant to Rule 701, this witness can testify that they appeared similar and can authenticate the letter this way. This is a question for ultimately weight and non-admissibility. Opposing counsel can cross on this issue if they want to go into more detail about the specifics, but sufficient foundation has been laid.
A brief response, Mr. Metz?
Yes, Your Honor. Opposing counsel is discussing the standard for what it would take for the witness to authenticate this. This does not meet the standard under 701. It must be rationally based off their perceptions. Now, this witness can talk about similarity of those writing styles, but to say that it was Harper himself, that would be speculation because the witness never saw him write that down.
Is there a rule of evidence in Midlands that directly goes towards the authenticating of handwriting, or do we have to rely on 701 in this instance?
Your Honor, there is actually there is a specific rule that talks about authenticating handwriting. It's under Rule 901B2, and it does allow for a witness to be able to authenticate handwriting in the way that Mr. Paris described it.
Do you have a response to that, Mr. Metz?
We have not had this witness show other examples of when he has seen that handwriting outside of just this letter alone. That has not been laid onto the record.
All right, so what I'm going to do is ask Mr. Grevin that you lay the appropriate foundation about whether or not this witness has previously seen Mr. Martini's handwriting. And if you're able to lay that foundation under 901, it will be allowed. And Mr. Metz, you're welcome to thorough cross-examination on the point if we get there.
That's Your Honor. Move to strike for now.
I will strike the portion where he said that it was Mr. Martini's handwriting, but I'll allow the portion of the foundation that's already been started to stay on the record.
Mr. Paris, prior to the wedding rehearsal dinner, had you ever seen Harper Martini's handwriting?
Yes. Earlier on, I'd seen some files written by Harper Martini, and as an investigative journalist, it's my job to pay attention to details like these. So I made sure to take note of what kind of handwriting he had. This same type of handwriting was matched exactly in the letter that he burned.
Did you see any differences in the prior handwriting of Mr. Martini?
I'm sorry, I believe that there's an objection.
Yes, Your Honor, to those files, there's a lack of foundation to show that those had Harper Martini's handwriting. He has not seen Harper write those down on those files.
Outside the presence of the jury, Mr. Paris, can you just repeat the portion of the testimony that you just gave about the previous handwriting, how you know that that's Mr. Martini's handwriting?
Well, I'd seen some of Harper Martini's personal files before, in which only he would have access to. And knowing this, I knew that it was his handwriting on those files, and as such, I was able to authenticate the letter.
Okay, so since it sounds like it's from business records that Mr. Martini wrote himself. Mr. Metz, if you believe that there is some room there that other people could have written in those files or anything, I'm happy to give you time right now to voir dire on that foundation before we continue.
Well, yes, Your Honor. Mr. Paras, briefly, Mr. Paras is not an employee of Peony Estates. He cannot speak about the business practice of Peony Estates and who has access to these files. To match the exact handwriting based off of some documents he had seen, that is speculation to say that only Mr. Martini's handwriting could have been on those documents as well. And that is a lack of foundation.
Brief response, Mr. Grevin.
Yes, Your Honor. This witness very clearly stated that this was found in Harper Martini's personal effects, where only Harper Martini had access to and was handwritten. This more than clearly establishes the bar required under 901B2 for this witness to authenticate the handwriting as belonging to Harper. And once again, this is a question of weight and non-admissibility. Opposing counsel is free to cross specific on this issue.
So you've both put up good arguments. I am going to allow this testimony in, but I expect heavy cross-examination on this point, Mr. Metz, so that the jury can thoroughly understand the information that they need to put weight to this evidence.
Permission to proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
So, Mr. Paris, this letter that we're talking about that you found on the night of the wedding rehearsal dinner, did it differ at all from the handwriting that you had previously seen with Mr. Martini, right?
No. And as an investigative journalist, I knew to keep track of things like these.
Would you recognize a picture of this letter if I were to show it to you?
Absolutely. I probably took it.
Your Honor, permission to display Exhibit 24 to the witness?
Permission granted, and from here on out, you don't have to ask permission, just go ahead and do it. The only thing you need to ask permission for is to show it to the jury.
Thank you, Your Honor. All right, Mr. Paris, is this the letter that you were speaking with us about?
Absolutely.
Is it a fair and accurate representation of the letter?
Yes.
Has it been changed or altered in any way?
No, not at all.
Your Honor, at this time I offer Exhibit 24 into evidence.
Any objection?
Without objection, Your Honor.
All right, so admitted.
Now, Mr. Paris, when you looked at this letter, did anything stand out to you about it?
Yes, there's the obvious description at the beginning of the letter about it has come to this, the wedding can't happen. I need you out of our lives. And that was paired up with the offer of money.
What was this offer of money in the letter?
Well, the letter clearly states, leave Casey alone and the enclosed $300,000 is yours. Don't make me do this the hard way or I will take you out of the picture. Don't let it come to this.
Do you know what the letter meant when it said, take you out of the picture the hard way?
I can't say I did. All I can say is what was on that letter and after I saw Harper go and burn it.
Thank you, Mr. Paris. We can take down the display of the letter. So, Mr. Paris, after you saw Harper Martini burn this letter, did you have any other interactions with the wine bottling area?
Absolutely. I decided to follow Harper Martini after seeing the letter, knowing that nothing good can come out of it. when he went to the wine bottling area and picked up that single bottle of Cara wine before heading out to the reception area.
Now, you said you saw Harper Martini grab that bottle of wine, head out to the reception area. Did you see anything else in that bottling area?
Yes, I was about to follow him when I took one last look around and noticed an empty bottle of pesticide right next to where that bottle of wine was located, with the label ripped off.
So you saw this empty can of pesticide and you saw Harper leave with the bottle of wine that was next to it. Where did you end up following Harper Martini?
I went to the wedding rehearsal dinner area, where I then later saw Harper Martini present Miss Genesis Petrillo with a single bottle of Cara wine.
Now, Mr. Paris, this bottle of wine that Harper Martini presented to Genesis Petrillo, did you see it differ at all from the bottle of wine that was next to the pesticide in the bottling area?
Not at all.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Cross-exam?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Paras, like any good journalist, you know it's important to collect as much information as possible.
Absolutely, that's my job.
Sir, on the night of the wedding rehearsal, you don't know how much Genesis Petrillo had to drink.
Sir, I don't think you understand. My job wasn't to investigate how much Genesis had to drink. My job was to look into the pesticide usage and investigate the winery as a whole.
Mr. Paras, I'm asking you about how much alcohol Genesis had to drink. You don't know how much she had to drink.
No, I do not.
Sir, you never saw Harper Martini put pesticides into the bottle of Cara either.
I didn't see Harper Martini put pesticides. All I was able to see was a single bottle of wine, separate from everything else in the room, located right next to an empty canister of pesticides, with a label clearly ripped off to try and almost cover it up.
Mr. Paras, that's a yes to my question. You never saw Harper put pesticides in that bottle.
No.
So I want to talk more about that note you mentioned, all right?
Absolutely.
You think Mr. Martini wrote that?
Yes, I know that for a fact.
But sir, you never saw him write those words down.
I didn't see him write the notes, but I knew enough of the handwriting to match it. The squiggles underneath the C's are enough to tell.
Sir, you only matched a couple squiggles off you found from some documents in the back room at Peony Estates.
They're not simply just documents. They were specific business records that only he had access to. Additionally, multiple times in them, he referred to himself in the first person.
Sir, you don't work for Peony Estates.
Your Honor, I ask that the witness be allowed to finish his response.
Yeah, go ahead and let the witness finish, and then you can continue with your examination.
In these business records, he identified himself by name as Harper, clearly leading to him being the only one who could have written these notes. After
Sir,
I understood this, I made sure to take
Your
care.
Honor, once again, I ask that the witness be allowed to finish his response.
Yeah, the witness can complete his answer, but be aware that the longer that you continue to go on with this question, the more that I am likely to sustain any request by Mr. Metz to limit your answers in the future.
Yes, Your Honor. All I would say is I knew that that was the handwriting, and I paid attention to it, and so I was able to identify it on the note later.
Sir, you don't have these documents with you today.
No, to steal documents like these from a business is clearly not within my job.
We're just going to have to take your word for it that you're able to break into that back room and find those documents.
I didn't break in. I walked in several times. I was able to get in quite easily, in fact.
Well, sir, you're not an employee at Peony Estates.
That's correct. I'm an investigative journalist.
You weren't asking for employees' permission to see those documents.
I found in my line of work that if you ask the companies you're investigating for permission, they rarely often give it to you.
So, sir, we're just going to have to take your word that you're able to go back there by yourself and find those documents.
Yes, I've done it many times before.
Well, I'd like to talk about why you're here today then, all right?
Yes,
You used to work for BNN.
that's correct.
That was until BNN fired you.
That's not entirely true. BNN let me go. They didn't fire me. There were budgetary issues. I was simply one of the members that wasn't able to stay on.
You lost your job at BNN.
That's true.
You lost your job as a journalist.
That is not true. I got plenty of work in the following months. I had several tips that had come to me over my course at BNN, which had been talking about different companies to investigate this and that. I was working those, which brought me to this case.
Sir, I'm asking about BNN. You lost your job as a journalist at BNN, right?
Yes, I became freelance.
After losing that job, you wanted to get back into working in journalism.
Of course, freelance work is fun and it certainly helps you feel like you're accomplishing more, but sometimes you need the stability of a real job.
And you were looking for other jobs in journalism.
Of course, journalism is what I love, ever since my dad read me those stories.
You weren't able to find anybody that would hire you as a journalist.
Not at this time. I mean, with how things are with COVID, this whole economy has been in terrible, terrible shape. Finding a job has been incredibly difficult.
Sir, you're still trying to find a job as a journalist with TBD.
Yes,
It was during this time you're looking for a job, you decided to investigate Peony Estates.
yes, while I was freelancing.
And since your investigation and reporting on the company, you've been able to have major success.
Yes,
When you were applying for TBD, you've been discussing the job with somebody named Landon Green.
that's correct.
Landon's pushing you to write about Peony Estates.
He is. It's one of my most prevalent cases, especially with the note at hand.
He told you he's
Your
impressed.
Honor, objection, lack of foundation.
To which portion of the testimony? I'm sorry, I think you stood up a second before it came through.
Yes, I'm sorry, I had to unmute myself, Your Honor. I'm objecting to the lack of foundation as to this witness's understanding of Mr. Green. If I may proffer, this witness's knowledge was acquired via statements, and so it's being offered as hearsay statements. So there's either not enough foundation or there will be a hearsay issue.
Okay, Mr. Metz, if you could respond to both the lack of foundation and the hearsay objection.
Yes, Your Honor. First, to the lack of foundation, I'm just asking this witness, to the best of his knowledge, what he understands from the job position. And he's fully able to do that to the best of his own knowledge. I'm not going outside of that. Second, to any hearsay statements, they're not going to the truth of the matter asserted. I'm going to the subsequent action, how this is pushing him to report and investigate on Peony Estates. We do not care about the truth value of that statement.
Respond.
Yes, Your Honor. So opposing counsel has not laid the foundation of how this witness would have knowledge of Mr. Green's intentions. And so that foundation needs to be laid for the members of the jury. And if it's laid through the statements of Mr. Green, then it's inadmissible hearsay statements. They are being offered for the truth of the matter asserted to assert what the conditions of Mr. Paris's employment are.
Brief response.
Yes, Your Honor, if I could clarify to which hearsay statement opposing counsel is objecting to specifically, and second, which intentions he finds do not have proper foundation.
Specifically, I'm objecting to the lack of foundation. Opposing counsel's statement that Mr. Green was pushing Mr. Paris towards a particular position, there's not been any foundation laid as to how Mr. Paris would know this.
May I respond, Your Honor?
No, I will note the objection, but it is overruled at this time.
May I proceed?
You may.
So, Sir Landon Green, you know him to be one of the workers at TBD Magazine.
Yes,
He told you he was highly impressed with your work.
yes,
In fact, he wasn't just impressed because he's talked about giving you a job for your reporting.
that's correct.
After this trial, you're going to write another story.
Yes,
but he gave you 2 conditions about that story if you want to get a job at TBD.
That it had to be a good one.
That's the first condition, right? It has to be a good story that Mr. Green likes.
Yes, of course. Any job like this will have you seeing many cases, and not every story gets to see the light of day. Mr. Green had a good instincts with this case. He knew something was going on, as did I. And so, yes,
Are you finished with your answer?
he pushed me to write about it because there's a story here.
Yes, I apologize for this venue. It's a bit difficult for me to understand sometimes if you're finished with your answer. So I apologize for any cutting off. But the second part was it also has to capture the interest of the reader.
As does every other story.
And you believe that if you can meet both those conditions, the job at TBD Magazine is yours.
Well, of course, that he offered me a job position, and it's dependent upon me writing good stories. It's the journalist job in a nutshell.
To be clear, you're not subpoenaed to be here.
No, I'm here because I witnessed an argument and a note with a $300,000 offer enclosed in.
You're here voluntarily.
That's correct.
Thank you, sir. No further questions at this time.
Any redirect?
Yes, briefly, Your Honor.
You have the floor.
Mr. Paris, you were talking about a good story as part of your employment. Does a good story have any untrue things in it?
Not at all. The best stories are the true ones.
Have you said anything untrue on the stand here today?
No. Everything I've said here is the honest truth to something I've witnessed.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Any redirect? Recross, sorry.
No recross, Your Honor.
All right, thank you for your time, Mr. Paris. You are excused. Any further witness for the plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor, if we can just switch out really quick.
Yeah, take as long as you need.
One moment, Your Honor. I'm just going to change my name.
Yeah, and whenever you're ready, you can start. You don't have to ask permission. I do. Before we begin, Midlands does not require experts to be formally tendered in court. Is that correct?
That is right.
Okay, thank you.
Your Honor, we call Dr. Jimin Kwan.
You may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Can you introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Hello, my name is Dr. Jen Kwan.
And what is your educational background?
Well, I hold an MD from UNC Chapel Hill, and I completed my medical residency at Emory University, where I stayed to complete a fellowship in medical toxicology.
Doctor, you just mentioned the word toxicology. What exactly does that mean?
Well, toxicology is the study of the way that toxins, such as poisons and alcohol, affect the human body. And also, toxicology is the study of diagnosis and treatments of such toxins.
And what do you do for a living?
Well, for my job, I am the chief emergency medical doctor at River Valley Medical, excuse me.
And what do you do in your role as an emergency doctor?
Well, my job as an emergency doctor is to quickly deal with emergency situations by assessing the symptoms and running tests, and I'm also an expert in toxicology in my job, so I often deal with cases of alcohol poisoning and other kinds of poisonings.
All right, so you just mentioned that you deal with toxicology and cases of poisoning. Now, when you're looking at these cases, what methods do you use to triage and conduct an investigation?
Well, my methods include first analyzing the symptoms and treating any that are extremely dire. And then after I've done that, I conduct tests, continue diagnoses, and then based on that, I treat the symptoms in order to make sure that the patient is able to leave the hospital. And in some unfortunate cases, I do conduct cause of death determinations.
And now, when you're using these methods, doctor, would you say that they're reliable and standard in your field?
Oh, absolutely. This is the standard for emergency medicine, and I mandated at River Valley Medical.
And when you were looking at the facts of this case, doctor, were you able to reliably apply that method?
Yes, I was.
And were you able to have sufficient facts and data to make an opinion about this case?
Yes, I was.
Now, Dr. Kwong, can you tell us why exactly are you in court today?
I was the ER doctor on call when Genesis Petrillo came to the hospital on June 9th, 2019.
And what exactly did you do and did you observe when she came to the hospital on that night?
Well, when Miss Petrillo came into the ER, I observed that she had symptoms of vomiting and nausea. And although she wasn't able to walk or speak, she did indicate to me by pointing to her chest and stomach that she was having difficulty breathing and stomach pain.
All right, doctor. Now, earlier you mentioned that you look at symptoms and try to determine what may have caused them. Did you have a preliminary determination of what may be causing her symptoms when she came in the ER?
Yes, when she first came into the ER, I believed that she may be suffering from alcohol poisoning, but a few things later throughout the night made me realize that this wasn't the case.
What made you realize this wasn't the case?
Well, I actually realized that some of the symptoms that Miss Petrillo was exhibiting were not consistent with alcohol poisoning, and I actually brought along a visual aid to indicate this.
And Your Honor will screen share a visual aid.
I assume that you would like this to be shared with the jury as well?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, any objection to this being shared with the jury at this time?
No, Your Honor.
All right.
Now, doctor, earlier you mentioned that there were several of her symptoms that were different than symptoms of alcohol poisoning. Could you point those out for us and explain?
Yes. Well, as you can see on the first side of the board, Genesis Petrillo, or the symptoms of alcohol poisoning, are listed out. And then later on the other side, you can see there are several items circled underneath the Genesis Petrillo symptoms that do not match and are in fact exact opposite to the symptoms of alcohol poisoning.
What are those symptoms?
Well, first, Genesis Petrillo had severely contracted pupils, which is different than that of alcohol poisoning. She was also tearing, which is not a symptom of alcohol poisoning. And she was later having muscle spasms, and she had a slowed pulse.
Now, doctor, you mentioned that these weren't symptoms of alcohol poisoning, and you can unshare the screen. They're not symptoms of alcohol poisoning. Are they symptoms of anything else?
Yes, these symptoms are consistent with organophosphate poisoning, or what we call pesticide poisoning.
Well, I'm going to back up and just talk a little bit about what exactly a pesticide can do to the body. Doctor, what happens when someone is poisoned by a pesticide?
Well, when someone is poisoned by a pesticide, first, they begin to have symptoms of digestive failure. And then after that, their nervous system begins to break down once their liver is unable to break down the poison. And then in very dire cases that often lead to death, the patient's respiratory functions begin to break down and they die of choking on their own vomit or difficulty breathing.
What was happening to Genesis Petrillo's body?
This is exactly what happened in this case. Miss Petrillo was showing symptoms of nausea and vomiting, and whenever I was able to see that her pupils were contracted, I was able to tell that Miss Petrillo's nervous system was shutting down. And later throughout the night, she was having bronchospasms or spasms of of the chest where she was unable to breathe and causing her to possibly choke on her vomit and seize.
Now, doctor, you mentioned that you believed it to be pesticide poisoning. So what did you do next?
Well, at that point, I ordered a blood test and also a test of her vomit. But because her symptoms were increasing so rapidly and because they were dire, I decided to administer the antidote for pesticide.
Did it work?
Unfortunately, no. Miss Petrillo, after I administered the antidote, a few minutes later, she had a bronchospasm or a coughing fit, and that led her to have a seizure. And then later she slipped into a coma, and she did die.
Now, doctor, I want to take a step back because you mentioned you believed it was pesticides that poisoned her. Doctor, how exactly can a pesticide even enter a person's system?
Well, there are 3 ways, and I brought along a visual aid to show this.
And Your Honor, we'll be screen sharing a visual aid to also be shared with the jury as well.
Any objection to this being shown to the jury at this time?
No, Your Honor.
All right, it will be shown to them.
Now, doctor, you mentioned there are 3 ways for a pesticide to be in a person's system. What are those 3 ways?
Well, first, there's contact, and then there's inhalation through the air, and finally, there's ingestion.
Were you able to rule out any of these methods of entering the system?
Yes, I was. First, I was able to rule out contact because on examination of Miss Petrillo's skin, there were no rashes that indicated such. I was also able to rule out inhalation because of the course of Miss Petrillo's symptoms, and they were not consistent with such. So at that point, I began to believe that she had ingested this pesticide in some fashion.
Doctor, when you examined her body, were you able to determine how she could have ingested this pesticide?
Well, other than her just drinking the pesticide straight, I was able to determine based on the test of her vomit and her blood test that she had consumed this pesticide with the wine that she had drank that night.
Thank you. I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Cross,
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Dr. Kwan.
Good afternoon.
Now, Genesis Petrillo presented to your department on June 8th, 2019, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
When she came in, she had a number of different symptoms.
Yes, she did.
She was vomiting.
Yes, and she was very nauseous.
She was having trouble responding to your questions, right?
Yes, she wasn't even able to speak. She had to point to areas where she was in pain.
And she was having trouble walking as well.
Yes, we did have to put her in a wheelchair.
Now, ma'am, these are all signs of alcohol poisoning.
Yes, that's what I originally thought, but later on, some other symptoms indicated that it was not alcohol poisoning.
That's right, Dr. Kwan, you originally thought that she was suffering from alcohol poisoning.
Yes, but I later determined that that just wasn't the case.
So you ordered a blood test for her, correct?
Yes, I did.
Would you recognize the results of that blood test if I showed them to you today?
Yes, I would.
I'm going to have my co-counsel, Mr. Metz, screen share Exhibit 5, which has been pre-admitted into evidence. Let me know when you can see it all right.
Okay, I can see it now.
Now, Dr. Kwan, you'd agree with me that this report holds the results of a test on a blood sample that was taken from Genesis at 3 a.m. on June 8th, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
At 3 a.m., Genesis Petrillo's blood alcohol content, or BAC, was 0.16, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Metz. You can go ahead and take that down. Now, doctor, we both know that the last time Genesis could have been drinking that evening was 12:42 a.m., right?
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of foundation.
Your Honor, if I may.
I want to hear a little bit more from Miss Mel. I'm sorry, can you let me know how to pronounce your last name again?
Oh, of course, Your Honor. It's Melcote.
I want to hear a little bit more from Miss Melcote first.
Now, Your Honor, the question that counsel asked was about when the last time Miss Petrillo was drinking that night. She was about to ask the last time she could have been drinking that night was X time. Now, this witness wasn't with Miss Petrillo earlier, and she can't testify to an event she wasn't at. She wasn't at the wedding, and she can only testify to when she came to the emergency room and when she was admitted. She doesn't even know when the doctor was called or the ambulance was called. She only knows when Miss Petrillo was admitted to the emergency room, and thus she can't know when the last time she was drinking was.
Your Honor, if I may.
You may.
outside the presence of the jury, and if I may proffer.
Yes.
In preparation for today's trial, Dr. Kwan did review the affidavit of Angel Rodriguez, who testified earlier today. Now, in Rodriguez's affidavit, they do write that 911 was called at 12:42 a.m. So this doctor does in fact have knowledge of that. This doctor does know that 911 was called at 12:42 a.m. and that was the last time that it could have been, that Genesis Petrillo could have been drinking. This is admissible.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
Briefly.
Your Honor, counsel just assumed that this was the last time Genesis Petrillo could have been drinking, but the doctor cannot know whether or not that actually was the last time she could have been drinking. The last time she could have been drinking could have been when someone maybe closed the bar. It could have been when the wedding ended. It could have been when they took Genesis away. The last time she could have been drinking could have been a number of different events at the wedding, and this witness can't testify for sure exactly when the last time she could have been drinking was.
Okay, I understand your objection. I am going to overrule it at this point. Ms. Lamerson, just make sure to ask the question in a way that this witness knows that you're not talking about when she actually last drank, but then when the last possible moment was for her to drink, just to make it clear for the jury.
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Kwan, you know that 911 was called at 12:42 a.m.
Yes, I do know that.
So 12:42 a.m. was the last time that Genesis could have been drinking.
As
correct?
far as I know.
Doctor, you know that in cases where someone's BAC was at least 0.25, it could be fatal. Correct?
I do know that.
And doctor, you'd agree with me that you just don't know if Genesis Petrillo's peak BAC that night was 0.16.
I don't know that it's the peak, but I know that it couldn't have gone any higher than 0.18 or maybe even 0.12.
Dr. Kwan, I'm not asking you to give me a number.
Your Honor,
I'm asking you.
I'd ask for the attorney to allow my witness to speak. She's an expert. She was just saying more than yes.
Yeah, please allow the witness to finish answering before you ask your next question.
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Kwan, I'll ask you one more time. You just don't know if 0.16
I'm so sorry.
Petrillo's peak BAC.
I'm so sorry. You're out of time for your cross.
Your Honor, may the witness answer the question. It was just a yes or no question.
Yeah, I'll give you this one last question.
Sure. Do you want me to repeat it, Dr. Kwan?
Yes, just one more time. Thank you.
You just don't know, yes or no, if Genesis Petrillo's peak BAC was 0.16.
Well, as I was saying before, I don't know that that was the peak, but I can be fairly certain that it didn't go any higher than 0.12 because BAC decreases at a rate of 0.017% very, very slowly. So furthermore, if she had entered the hospital at a BAC of 0.25 or any higher, she probably would have died sooner than she did.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Kwan, in your estimation, we talked a lot about the peak BAC.
I'm sorry, they're out of time. There is no time for a redirect examination.
I'm sorry. I thought you said that the crossing attorney was the one that was out of time.
Both teams are now out of time.
Our timekeeper had us at 1 minute left.
That's incorrect according to my time log. I have you at 7 seconds over already.
We'll go ahead and since we went with it was the same. I'm sorry, I can't see who's talking when you don't have a screen on. Is the individual who was telling us that the cross time was up the same individual that is now telling us that the direct time is up?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, and do both teams agree that the crossing attorney was out of time?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
Yes, Your Honor, I had her at about 5 seconds.
Okay, so I will give one question on redirect if the defense is okay with that.
We're
Yes,
fine with that, Your Honor.
Okay.
Dr. Kwong, is it possible that her BAC reached a level that could have killed her that night in your estimation?
No, it's not possible, considering that if her BAC was at 2.5 or any high fatal level, Ms. Petrillo would have died much sooner than she did.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Kwan. You may be excused. Anything further from the plaintiff?
No, Your Honor, the plaintiff rests.
All right, would we like to take a brief recess?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, I'm showing that it's 3:35. Let's be back at 3:40, all right?
Yes, Your Honor.
Plaintiff and defense, please let me know when you guys are all assembled and ready to go.
Yes, Your Honor, our demonstratives person, we'll just take a moment to get our exhibits up and then I'll change my name, but we will be ready to go.
Your Honor, just as a heads up, the defense is dealing with a potential tab violation. One will need a moment.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to leave this meeting and go to the tab room, I think. Or yeah, can you get on that laptop? Can you get on that? I'm going to leave this meeting and come back and go to that one.
Okay.
Yeah, they're telling us to come to the tab room, so. I'm sorry, we just talked with the TAB representatives there, continuing to discuss. So we will update you guys what we know.
Okay, are we keeping the trial on pause until we hear back, or are we able to continue?
We're keeping on pause until we hear back.
Okay.
We're ready to begin. I think it was resolved in the top room. So we are ready to begin whenever opposing counsel is.
Is defense ready to proceed? Or do you need a
Yes,
couple
Your
more?
Honor.
Ready? Okay. All right,
And
defense.
actually, I'm going to change my name really quick.
All right, let me know when you're ready.
All right, I'm ready now. Thank you.
All right, defense, you may begin your case in chief. Do you have a witness to call?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Harper Martini.
All right, welcome, Mr. Martini. You may begin whenever you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
I am Harper Martini.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a winemaker. I own my own winery, Peony Estates.
Where are you from?
Well, I was born in California, but Midlands is my home.
How long have you been in the area?
For almost 20 years.
Do you have any family?
Just my son, Casey. He's the only family I got left.
Mr. Martini, have you been with us listening throughout the course of this trial?
Yes. Yes, I have. It's been quite emotional for me.
Today, we've heard the plaintiff accuse you of poisoning Genesis Petrillo. I'd like to give you the chance to address that for yourself right at the beginning here. Did you do that?
Absolutely not. I would never even think about doing something like that. Now, I know my relationship with Genesis wasn't great, but I was willing to accept her into my life. I swear, I did not do that.
What do you mean it wasn't the best relationship?
Well, Genesis and I struggled to get along. I mean, from the moment I met her, all she could ever talk about was how she was going to make $1 off of my business. And she didn't respect me. She didn't respect my work, but that does not mean I would have poisoned her.
Sir, we can talk about poisoning in a moment, but for now, I want to talk about that relationship. How did you meet Genesis?
I met her about 5 years ago. Casey brought her around to my winery, and well, let's just say I wasn't impressed.
Why weren't you impressed?
It was like she fell upon a pot of gold or something when she first laid eyes on my property. I mean, she kept asking how much everything was worth. I mean, kept saying my wine was plain. You know, if I were to pass on my business to Casey, I'd want him to be with someone that respected the Martini legacy, wanted to preserve it. From the get-go, Genesis just wanted to profit from it.
Were you having any
Objection, Your Honor? To speculation?
You may be heard.
Your Honor, specifically to the line, Genesis just wanted to profit from it. While this witness can testify to what she maybe have heard Genesis express about it, to say that that was all Genesis wanted was a profit goes far beyond his rationally based perception to draw that conclusion about someone that he didn't even like in the first place.
Any response?
Yes, Your Honor. Under 701, the witness is able to testify to this as is rationally based on the perceptions. Mr. Martini has told us that from every encounter, he's not been impressed with Genesis because they're always bringing up the profit that he's making at his company, how much his company is worth, and what she'd be able to get from Casey, his son. Now, this is just from those encounters with Genesis that Mr. Martini is talking about. That's not going to speculation. This is just why he wasn't impressed with her. Now, opposing counsel is welcome to bring that up on cross-examination if they'd like. It's a matter of weight, not admissibility.
I believe that the witness worded his answer in the way of not what he believed, but what Genesis actually thought. So I'm going to sustain the objection.
Move to strike.
So granted.
Mr. Martini, you were telling us about Genesis' relationship with Casey. Were you having any recent problems leading up to the wedding?
Yeah. Genesis had recently received a job offer in France, and they were planning on leaving the country to move there after the wedding.
Why was that a problem?
Well, I was concerned about who's going to take over the business. I mean, one day I'll grow old and gray and pass on from this world. And if Casey's in France, then everything I've built will be lost.
Did you try stopping them?
All the way up to the wedding, I begged them to reconsider their plans, and they wouldn't budge. And they wouldn't budge because of Genesis, and I didn't know what to do.
Your Honor, to speculation as to the phrase, they wouldn't budge because of Genesis.
Response.
Your Honor, this is not speculation. This is the witnesses' conversations with Genesis and Casey. And they did end up moving to France, or they were going to move to France regardless of what Mr. Martini had to say. It's not speculation to say that they weren't going to move to France from that.
May I be heard, Your Honor?
You may.
My objection specifically wasn't to the fact that they weren't going to move to France, which is what counsel is arguing. My objection was they weren't going to move to France because of Genesis, that it was somehow Genesis's decision not to move to France, and she made that executive decision. That's specifically what is speculative. There's been no foundation as to how this witness knows why they made that decision, why they wouldn't move, and why it was in particular Genesis who was the reason they wouldn't budge.
All right, I will sustain it now, but Mr. Metz, if you want to ask your witness a couple foundational questions to elicit why he knew it was Genesis and not Casey's decision, then you will be allowed to re-ask the question.
Move to strike?
Yes, Your Honor.
Granted.
Now, Mr. Martini, you're talking about your conversations with Genesis. Why were you saying that they were keeping them moving to France?
Well, Genesis had received a job offer in France, and I didn't want them to move there. I mean, I wanted Casey to stay here, take on the family business, and I didn't know what to do. So I'm embarrassed to say it, but I offered Genesis a significant sum of money to leave Casey and call off the wedding.
Mr. Martini, what were you going to give Genesis?
$300,000. I sealed it in a note and told her if it's the money she was after, she could have it. I wasn't going to let her destroy everything I've worked for.
Objection, Your Honor. To best evidence.
You may be heard.
Your Honor, under Rule 1002, if a witness is going to testify to the contents of an exhibit, they have to present the courts with the best form of that evidence. Right now, the witness is testifying to a very specific exhibit and testifying to its contents without entering it. We would just ask that they enter this exhibit first.
Okay, is this a different note than what you all entered on your case in chief?
No, Your Honor, it's the same note. However, it is not being presented to the jury at this time, rather just through testimony.
Are you arguing that so you accept that the content of the note that's already in evidence is correct and has not been altered in any way?
Yes, Your Honor.
Overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, sir, you're talking about a note. Would you recognize a copy of that note if I showed it to you?
Yes.
At this time, my co-counsel, Ms. Gronick, should be sharing with you a picture of that document. Let me know if you see it.
I can see it.
What do you recognize that to be?
It's the note I gave to Genesis.
Now, to be very clear, had you shown this note to anybody else?
No.
Earlier, we heard somebody named Mr. Paras say they saw this note. To the best of your knowledge, is that true?
I don't know. I can't say. No.
We heard Mr. Paras say they were in the room with you during your conversation with Genesis. Did you see Mr. Paras in the room?
No. I did not know he was there. If he was there, what he's talking about.
Sir, what do you talk about in this note?
Just what I wrote. I gave her the choice.
Sir, on that letter, you write, if Genesis doesn't take the $300,000, you're going to take her out of the picture the hard way. What do you mean by that?
Look, I know that sounds weird, but I was referring to cutting Casey out of the inheritance. I mean, Genesis never appreciated my winery and the work it took me to get where I'm at today. You know, they made clear that when they moved, they weren't going to take care of the business. I mean, how could they? They'd be in France. And make no mistake about it, I love my son and would do anything for him. But if he were to marry a woman like Genesis and sell my life's work away like some antique, I mean, I was going to have to find someone else.
Did she end up cashing the check?
No, she never cashed it.
Thank you, Ms. Gronick. We can set that aside for now. I want to talk more about the bottle of Cara. Did you give it to Genesis?
Yes, I gave it to her at the rehearsal dinner. I made a toast and offered it to her as a gift.
How'd the rehearsal dinner start?
Well, people started arriving at our banquet hall around 6. You know, it was a pretty big party.
What happened after people got there?
Well, just standard wedding party stuff, I guess. People were celebrating, eating, drinking, dancing, and then I made a toast, thanked everyone for coming and being a part of the rehearsal, and then I gave Genesis the bottle of wine.
Why did you give her the bottle of wine?
Well, the day before the rehearsal, Casey pulled me aside and asked if we could talk about his future and his relationship with Genesis. And make no mistake about it, he knew more than anyone else that I did not approve of Genesis. But he asked me, you know, out of the goodness of my heart, to put my feelings aside and, you know, respect Genesis that night and make his day special. And, you know, his mom passed when he was 4. And I know without a doubt that she would have welcomed Genesis regardless of anything. And that's what I tried to do by toasting to her and offering one of my best bottles of wine.
Do you know how much of the wine she had to drink that night?
I can't tell you exactly, but I saw her pour a few glasses for herself and drink a few glasses.
When did you leave?
Around 10:30, not too long after I gave her the bottle.
Did you see her again after that?
No, I never saw her again. I actually went to her room to go check on her the next morning, but she wasn't there, so I just assumed she was with Casey. But not too long after that, I received a phone call from one of her friends, and they told me what happened.
What did you hear?
She was in a coma, and then later that she passed.
Why did you go into her room?
Well, she thought she was drinking a lot that night. You know, I saw her drinking wine, drinking champagne, drinking drinks at the bar. And, you know, I just wanted to make sure she was all right and ready for the big day.
What happened after that?
Well, I left her room and just headed back to the winery. But before I left, I noticed that the bottle of Cara was on the ground and it was empty. So I picked it up and threw it out on my way back.
I want to talk more about where you threw it away. Sir, we've heard there were pesticides on that bottle. Do you have any idea how they got on the bottle?
No, I know a lab test said it tested positive for pesticides, but I have no idea how, because I know there's no way that happened before I gave it to her.
Does your winery use pesticides?
Yes, we do. We use them indoors and outdoors for just a pest deterrent.
What happens when you're finished spraying?
We either store them at our storage facility or we throw them out.
Sir, do you know if those pesticides were thrown away in the same dumpster as the bottle of Cara?
Yeah, I mean, we throw our pesticides in various dumpsters, and usually in one that's in between our bed and breakfast and winery.
Thank you, sir. No further questions at this time.
Cross exam?
Yes, Your Honor.
You have the floor.
May I proceed?
You may. Sorry, getting to the mute button is hard sometimes.
Now, Mr. Martini, on May 12th of 2019, Genesis Petrillo sent you a voicemail, right?
Yes.
You'd recognize a transcript of that voicemail if I were to show it to you?
Yes.
Your Honor, can we screen share Exhibit 8? It's been pre-admitted into evidence.
Any objection to that?
Without objection, Your Honor.
All right, you're allowed.
So you received this voicemail from Genesis about a month before the wedding was scheduled to take place, right?
Yes.
And in this voicemail, Genesis told you that she was moving to France, right?
Yes.
She told you she was taking your son with her, right?
Yes. I mean, I think she was drinking that night. She was, yeah, that's what she said.
Sir, I'm not asking about whether or not you thought she was drinking that night. All I'm asking is what she said. She said she was taking your son with her to France, right?
Yes.
She said you'd never see her again.
That's what she said.
That made you upset, right?
Well, of course.
Right. Casey is the son to your planet.
Yeah, I mean, I love my son. I want to see him again. I want him to be a part of my life.
And that's when you knew that Casey marrying Genesis would be a mistake, right?
Yes, I didn't approve of the relationship, but you know, my son's a grown man. He can make his own decisions.
You just told us that he can make his own decisions, but just to be clear, you wanted nothing more than to stop the wedding once you heard this information, right?
Yeah, I mean, I never wanted them to get married in the first place, but yeah.
Well, now, I'd like to talk about a letter that you brought up earlier. Can we screen share Exhibit 24 that was mentioned on direct examination?
You may.
Now, you mentioned that your son was a grown man, he can make his own decisions, but you did intervene in their relationship, right?
Yes, like I said earlier, I essentially tried to pay her off because, you know, I thought that's what she was after.
Right. And on direct, you talked all about how this was actually about the inheritance, right? You were going to cut her off from that.
Right. I mean, that's what I heard in the note.
Doctor, you never mention inheritance in this note, right?
No, but when I gave it to her and when we talked, she knew clearly what I meant.
I'm not asking about whether or not what you thought she knew. All I'm asking is if this note says inheritance and it doesn't.
Well, that's what I told her, but in the note, I didn't explicitly write that, no.
Right, what you did say was that you'll take her out of the picture the hard way, right?
Yes, that's what I wrote.
You told her she had until June 7th, right?
Well, that's when they were planning on getting married.
That was actually the day of the rehearsal dinner, right?
Excuse me, yes.
I want to talk about what happened on June 7th. We can unshare that. Thank you. Now, on June 7th, you were at the rehearsal dinner for Casey and Genesis's wedding, right?
Yes.
And at around you talked on direct examination. You told us that later in the next morning, you went to go check on Genesis. Is that what you said?
Yes.
That was at 2:30 in the morning after the rehearsal dinner, right?
No, that's not true.
Sir, did you go to Genesis's room at 2:30 in the morning, the night after the rehearsal dinner, the morning after the rehearsal dinner?
No, it was around 8 a.m.
Is it your testimony today that you never went to Genesis's room at 2:30 in the morning?
Yes.
You'd recognize, you wrote a statement in preparation for this case?
Yes.
You'd recognize it if I were to show it to you?
Yes.
Your Honor, can we screen share the witness's statement?
You may.
Yes. Sir, I'm sorry, do you have the statement up? One moment, Your Honor. It's just her statement. Can we scroll down to line 332? Mr. Martini, I want you to look at line 332 and read silently as I read aloud.
Okay.
At around 2:30 a.m. on June 8th, 2019, I received a panic call from one of my employees that the employee heard that someone had been rushed from Peony Estates to the hospital. I asked the employee who the person was, but the employee wasn't sure. I suspected Genesis. I wouldn't be surprised if Genesis managed to get food poisoning the night before the wedding. I figured Genesis could have also gotten alcohol poisoning. I had seen Genesis drink quite a bit of wine the night before. Question, what did you do? Answer, I went to the room where I knew Genesis was staying. Did I read
next morning.
Did I read that correctly, though? You said after you received the call, what did you do? I went to the room where I knew she was staying?
Yes. So I heard someone may have gone to the hospital at 2:30 in the morning, but that didn't cause me to rush to Genesis's room. I went to her room the following morning.
So it's your testimony that when the question was, what did you do? You did it the next morning, but you never clarified that in your statement?
Objection, Your Honor, to hearsay may be heard.
Briefly.
Your Honor, in this jurisdiction, there's no improper impeachment objection. So under 801, this statement is an out-of-court statement being used for the truth. However, there's no contradiction within this statement and the witness's testimony, so it would be hearsay. In this statement, he gets the call at 2:30 a.m., but it doesn't say he goes to the room at 2:30 a.m. That is not a contradiction, and the statement is hearsay.
May I be heard, Your Honor?
I don't know if that's going to be necessary. Your witness did testify a moment ago that he went to the room at 8 a.m., right?
Yes, Your Honor, that is correct.
Okay, then I'm going to overrule the objection.
All right, so I want to talk to you, and you can unshare that screen. Thank you. I want to talk to you about what happened when you did go to that room. Now, you went to Genesis's room, right?
Yes.
You thought she might have gone to the hospital.
Yeah, earlier that night, I mean, she was drinking a lot. I wouldn't have been surprised if she had alcohol poisoning. So that's why I said that. And but in that moment, I just assumed she was probably with Casey.
Sir, you went to her room.
Yeah.
You went there alone.
Yes.
You saw the bottle of Cara wine that you bottled, right?
Yes, it was on the floor and it was empty.
You ripped the label off?
Yes, I did that because I was planning on putting it in their wedding album. Just another gift.
Sir, you ripped the label off that wine bottle, didn't you?
Yeah, I took it off to save it.
You threw it in the trash.
I threw the bottle away in the trash, yes.
And you are happy about Genesis's death.
Well, happy is a strong word. I thought she was undermining my relationship with my son. So, I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing that she's out of my life.
Sir, happy is a strong word, but that's how you feel, right? You specifically are happy that she is dead.
Yes, I guess you could say that.
I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. I just asked that Mr. Martini be excused.
All right, Mr. Martini, thank you for testifying today. You are excused from the stand.
And Your Honor, one moment while we switch out our attorneys.
Is plaintiff ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, defense, you may call your next witness.
The defense calls Dr. Richard Cannon. May I proceed?
You may.
Please introduce yourself to the court.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Richard Cannon.
What kind of doctor are you?
I'm a toxicologist and a pharmacologist. In short, it means that I study the way that harmful substances interact with the human body.
Where did you go to school to become a toxicologist and a pharmacologist?
I graduated from Harvard Medical School, summa cum laude, back in '96 with an emphasis in toxicology. For the next 18 years, I worked both in Massachusetts General Hospital, eventually becoming head of toxicology, and eventually teaching at Midlands Medical School. Ever since, I've worked at a private consulting firm in toxicology cases.
One moment, I'm sorry. It looks like the plaintiff.
Yes, Your Honor. Defense put as their third call Dr. Cannon, and they moved Dr. Cannon up to their second call. So that's why we're switching out. We can go with Dr. Cannon as the second one, but that wasn't in the captain's form, and that wasn't what was agreed to at the round. We're fine making the switch, but that's why we're changing it.
Okay, so Mr. Grevin, you will be crossing this witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, sorry to
apologize. I thought that had been communicated.
No worries. Sorry to interrupt, Ms. Lamerson. You may continue.
No worries. Dr. Cannon, would you like me to re-ask the next question?
Yes, please.
How did you get involved in today's case?
I was contacted back on April 2nd of this year by Mr. Martini's attorneys to assess any connections there may be between the death of Genesis Petrillo and a bottle of wine produced by P&E Estates.
What information did you have to review?
I was provided the same information that Dr. Kwon was provided in today's case. I reviewed her work, as well as a number of exhibits. This was sufficient for me to use my method in today's case.
How did you use that information in your analysis, doctor?
Well, my method is a simple comparative analysis in which I compare the analysis conducted by Dr. Kwon to the medical certainties and facts of this case. It's one of the most standard methods in my field. As far as I'm aware, it's still taught in the medical schools, and I was able to apply it reliably here.
So Dr. Cannon, what did you discover during your investigation into Ms. Petrillo's death?
What I discovered is that we just don't know what happened. I examined a number of different possibilities as to what could have caused the death and found significant flaws with all of them, including the theory of pesticide poisoning. There's a number of flaws with it, and we can't rule out anything or confirm anything in today's case.
What were some of those flaws?
But one of the biggest flaws with the theory is that there's an intense overlap between alcohol poisoning symptoms and organophosphate poisoning symptoms. Accordingly, we can't rule out alcohol poisoning in today's case.
Why not?
Well, like I said, there's a number of symptoms that overlap. Accordingly, when Ms. Petrillo was admitted into Dr. Kwon's emergency room, she was of the opinion that Genesis had alcohol poisoning. The number of symptoms that Genesis experienced includes nausea, incontinence, vomiting, unconsciousness, And these are all consistent with alcohol poisoning, including the ultimate cause of death, which was respiratory paralysis.
Dr. Cannon, would alcohol poisoning explain all of the symptoms that Ms. Petrillo had?
No, alcohol poisoning doesn't explain all of them. There's just significant overlap, which is why it's so confusing in this case, and we're unable to say with any degree of medical likelihood what really happened. Accordingly, it's really hard to say. And that's in no small part due to a lack of evidence collected by Dr. Kwan during the examination.
What evidence was lacking?
Well, when Ms. Petrillo was admitted, she was in the emergency room for 2 hours before her blood alcohol content was sampled. And that's very confusing to me given Dr. Kwan's initial belief that Ms. Petrillo was suffering from alcohol poisoning. It would be essential to know that BAC as soon as possible so you can determine the peak BAC with a greater degree of certainty. But we don't have that due to that 2-hour delay.
Doctor, you mentioned you reviewed Dr. Kwan's report. In that report, did Dr. Kwan ever mention a formula that you could use to calculate BAC?
No, ma'am, of course she didn't. There is no universally recognized formula that can be used to calculate BAC decline. There's far too many individual factors, such as size, liver capacity, stomach contents, among others, for anyone to make any conclusions about how fast a BAC may drop from its peak.
Dr. Cannon, do you know how high her peak BAC could have been?
Well, as we lack a method for determining a drop rate, it's simply medically impossible. We don't know for sure. What we can say is that Genesis, by her own admission, had a lot to drink that night and was experiencing a number of symptoms that are associated with a higher BAC.
You may be heard.
Your Honor, specifically, this witness is offering Genesis's statements that she had a lot to drink tonight for the truth of the matter asserted, that she had a lot to drink tonight.
I did not hear what the objection was to, or is it a hearsay objection?
Yes, Your Honor, it's a hearsay objection and a related one.
To Genesis's statements, just to make sure I'm clear.
Yes,
okay.
Genesis's statement that she had too much to drink tonight.
Thank you.
Your Honor, if I may.
Response, yes.
We're not using this testimony with this witness for the truth of the matter asserted, but rather for the subsequent action of Dr. Kwan and how that action may have impacted the doctor's findings in today's case.
Any response to that?
Yes, Your Honor, I disagree. I think it's absolutely being offered for the truth of the matter asserted, and it is the central truth claim that the defense is alleging, that Genesis had too much to drink tonight, and they are using these statements for the truth of the matter asserted to lay that claim. And the doctor doesn't need it for subsequent action. He can explain the evidence that he found relating to Genesis' symptoms. He doesn't need this initial claim. And so it's a way that they're using subsequent action to try to backdoor in statements for the truth.
Yes.
If you find that the statement does have truth value, I do have an exception to the rule. This would make the exception for a medical diagnosis or treatment. Statements made from a patient to their physician are inherently truthful because a patient would not lie to their physician, and therefore this evidence is admitted.
May I respond to that, Your Honor?
Briefly.
No foundation at all has been laid to qualify under 803.4. We don't know the context of when Genesis made this statement. Or where it was, to whom. We know none of this information. The doctor just said Genesis made this statement.
Okay, so either if you, Ms. Lamerson, want this statement in for the truth of the matter, I'm going to agree with Mr. Grevin and ask that you lay more foundation about the surroundings and when that statement was made in order to get to that exception. However, if you do not want it in for the truth of the matter, but rather want to use it for subsequent course of action, we can go with that. And I'll give a limiting instruction to the jury that that statement is not to be used for the truth of the matter, and will allow plaintiff to object during closing if that statement is used for the truth of the matter during closing. So it's up to you which way you want that statement to come in. And then we'll
yes, Your Honor, we can lay more foundation if that's all right.
Okay, so objection is sustained at the moment. I will strike that testimony. But once you lay the proper foundation, if there is no objection, you can elicit it again.
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Cannon, did you review any materials that spoke of Ms. Petrillo's alcohol and how much she had drank that night?
Yes, ma'am. I reviewed a number of statements, including the report of Dr. Kwan. In that report, Dr. Kwan states that Genesis told her that she'd had a lot to drink that night. And this is consistent with the meaningfully more dangerous symptoms exhibited by Ms. Petrillo that are consistent with higher BAC levels than a 0.16.
So, Dr. Cannon, what does that tell us about what Genesis Petrio's potential peak BAC could have been that night?
Well, while we can't say an official number for sure with peak BAC due to lack of testing by Dr. Kwan, what I can say is that a number of the symptoms are consistent with life-threatening levels of BAC. While we can't say anything with certainty, we can't rule it out.
Thank you, Dr. Cannon. I have nothing further.
Cross-exam?
Yes, Your Honor. So, Dr. Cannon, I want to talk about some things that you didn't do in today's case. First, you didn't have access to the body, right?
No, sir, it had been cremated.
You also didn't interview anyone in today's case.
No, I was provided with all the medical evidence that was required in the form of an eyewitness example of Angel Rodriguez and the expert report of Dr. Kwan, along with all medical records that were relevant.
But you didn't interview any of these people.
No, all the information I had was included in those reports.
So, Doctor, I now want to talk a little bit about BAC. So you agree with me that the blood alcohol content of Ms. Petrillo when she entered the hospital was 0.16%, right?
No, I disagree.
When they tested her for BAC, her blood alcohol content was 0.16%, right?
Yes, when they tested her approximately 2 hours after admittance, it was 0.16.
Now, you would agree that the BAC level, consistent with roughly a life-threatening alcohol poisoning case, is around 0.3%, right?
I'm aware that Dr. Kwan has seen it as low as 0.25. So that's what I can say on that one.
But Dr. Ken, I want to talk about what you're familiar with. And what you are familiar with is BAC levels around 0.3%, right?
That's what I've personally experienced, yes.
And so when she was tested for her BAC, it was at a level roughly half that of the level needed, in your opinion, to reach life-threatening alcohol poisoning, right?
The 0.3 is a peak BAC requirement, not a at the moment. So the 0.16 is not equal to 0.3, but that's not a link that we can draw.
So when she was tested, she was at the BAC level of roughly half of the peak BAC level, right?
That's correct.
All right, doctor. So you were aware that the bottle of wine, of Cara wine, was tested, and it tested positive for pesticides, right?
That was my understanding. It was found in a dumpster, so I have concerns about cross-contamination, but that's what the test revealed.
All the food and beverages at the event were tested for pesticide poisoning, right?
That's my understanding.
They all tested negative, right?
That's what I read.
Genesis Petrillo drank from a Cara bottle of wine, right?
That's my understanding.
And that, and you don't have any evidence of anyone else drinking from that bottle of wine, right?
That's incorrect.
Dr. Cannon, you have no evidence of anyone consuming significant quantities of that bottle of wine other than Ms. Petrillo, right?
As far as I'm aware, that's true. I know that Angel Rodriguez did sample the wine. However, I'm only aware of Genesis having drank substantially from that bottle.
Yes, but there were no other fatalities other than Genesis Petrillo, right?
No, sir. No other fatalities.
All right, so you talked about things that we just can't know in this case, but I want to talk about what's most likely. So you believe that it is most likely that Genesis Petrillo was poisoned via the bottle of wine, right?
When you say most likely, do you mean on an absolute or relative scale?
I mean what you, Dr. Cannon, think, that it's most likely that she was poisoned there, right?
I think on an absolute scale, it is very unlikely. I think on a relative scale, of all the things I could look at with the information we have, it is the most likely of all the options we can consider.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you for your testimony today, Dr. Cannon. You are excused.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Does the defense have any further testimony? Or witnesses, excuse me.
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Blair Osborne.
All right, let's give the plaintiff a couple minutes to swap out their attorneys, and then you have the floor. Thank you for being here today, Ms. Osborne.
The plaintiff is ready to proceed, Your Honor.
All right, floor is yours.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon. Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
My name is Blair Osborne.
What do you do for a living, ma'am?
Well, I'm currently a private event planner. I own my own business, Bliss by Blair, bringing beauty to life's blissful moments. Any event, Bliss by Blair can make it beautiful.
How long have you been a private event planner?
Well, I got my start arranging little intimate gatherings between family and friends years ago, but I couldn't keep doing that for free. So I made it official. I opened my own business in 2011. And now if Aunt Cheryl Dean wants a retirement gala, well, she'll have to pay me for it.
Miss Osborne, were you involved in arranging the wedding of Casey Soto and Genesis Petrillo?
You and I both know I was.
When were you brought on board to help plan that wedding?
Okay, see, that's a little tricky. See, Harper brought me on in October. However, I wasn't actually meeting with the couple until that next year.
You said Harper. Is that Mr. Martini?
That's correct.
Was that the first time that you'd met Mr. Martini?
No, I'd met him tons of times. See, he owns the venue, Peony Estates Winery, so I'd met him through a bunch of events I'd hosted, weddings, birthdays, whatever.
And can you clarify, ma'am, was it Mr. Martini or the couple who hired you?
I see you're confused. I was confused too, but it's important to understand that Harper was the one who hired me and Harper was the one footing the bill.
Can you elaborate on what you meant by you being confused?
Yes. See, Harper had his own vision for the wedding and he only ever tried to make it work, but dealing with the helicopter parent is one thing. I had to deal with Genesis and Harper kept contacting me to change things without telling the others, and it made for a very confusing process and a lot of tension between them.
With all that tension, if it was Mr. Martini who owned the venue and Mr. Martini who was paying your bill, did he ever ask you to cancel the wedding?
Oh no, he only ever tried to make it work.
So let's jump forward to that wedding rehearsal. Were you there when Mr. Martini presented the wedding party with bottles of wine?
I was there and it was a lovely moment actually. See, he gave each of the women of the wedding party their own bottle. And then when it came time to give Genesis her bottle, he said, I want this to be special just for you to have in a private moment.
Did you see Miss Petrillo drink from that bottle of wine?
I saw her drink from it and then some. In fact, when I left the whole event at around 12, she was still at the cocktail bar.
Ma'am, do you know how much Miss Petrillo had to drink that night?
I can just say that she was clearly intoxicated.
That night? Can you hear me, ma'am?
Yes, I can hear you.
Miss I'm sorry, you froze after Miss Osborne's answer to the last question. If you could just start back at the beginning of your next question so I can make sure to catch it.
Of course, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Miss Osborne, did you also see someone named Angel Rodriguez drinking that night?
Yes, I did. I saw Angel and Genesis together at the cocktail bar.
If the bottle of wine that had been given to Miss Petrillo was contaminated by pesticides, do you know anything about when that happened?
No, I wouldn't know anything about that.
Did you ever see Mr. Martini put pesticides in that bottle of wine?
Well, of course not.
Did you see Miss Petrillo the next morning?
No, I even knocked on her door and then I knocked on Angel's door just to be sure. I contacted both of them and there was no response.
Was Mr. Martini with you at the time?
Yes, he was with me the whole morning since I saw him in the lobby around 7 a.m. and I asked him how he was feeling.
Well, without giving us any specific statement that Mr. Martini made, what did you take away from what he told you?
Well, he was anxious and just wanted the wedding to go well.
Objection, Your Honor, to lack of foundation.
You may be heard.
Your Honor, there has been no foundation laid as to how this witness would know that Mr. Martini felt anxious or that he felt stressed without a statement being elicited. And if that's so, then that's hearsay.
May I respond?
Yes.
Your Honor, sufficient foundation has been laid. In fact, Ms. Osborne told us that she asked Mr. Martini how he was feeling. The conversation that ensued is the sufficient foundation that's been laid.
Your Honor, then that conversation, Harper Martini's statements are hearsay. They're statements being offered for the truth of the matter.
Okay, response to that?
Your Honor, in response to a hearsay objection, there is no statement that's hit the record that could be taken for the truth of the matter asserted. In fact, I explicitly prevented the witness from offering any potential hearsay statements by asking her not to give us anything specific that Mr. Martini told her, only to tell us what she took away from that conversation.
Your Honor, if I may?
Very briefly.
Very briefly, Your Honor. If there was no statement elicited, then there's no foundation that has been laid for how we would know that this witness took away an impression from the conversation. And because of that, there's a lack of foundation. And in order to lay that foundation, my opposing counsel would have to elicit this statement, which would then be hearsay.
Ms. Farron, you can't have it both ways. I'm going to ask I will either allow them to lay that foundation and elicit those statements, which I will give a limiting instruction to the jury to let them know that they're not being allowed for the truth of the matter, but rather as a foundational aspect as to what Ms. Osborne believed at the time, or I will overrule your lack of foundation objection and allow her to testify it without the statements coming onto the record. Which would you prefer?
The first option, Your Honor.
Okay, so then I will sustain your lack of foundation objection. I will allow the defense to elicit these hearsay statements. I will give a limiting instruction to the jury that any statements that we're about to hear from Mr. Martini are not to be taken as the truth, but rather just as the underlying information that Ms. Osborne had that may or may not be true that allowed her to come to her rationally based perception of Mr. Martini at that time. Ms. Gronick, if any of those statements that are coming in you believe have an exception or should be allowed for the truth, I can hear that from you now.
No, Your Honor, we're fine with that limiting instruction.
All right. You may continue.
Ms. Osborne, how did Mr. Martini tell you that he was feeling?
Well, he told me that he was anxious and he hoped that the wedding would be perfect and it'd be everything Casey's always imagined it to be. And that he hoped that their wedding would be as perfect as their marriage will be.
How did Mr. Martini respond when Miss Petrillo was missing that morning?
Well, he seemed pretty upset. He said, I swear, if Genesis is throwing up in some gutter somewhere, she'll never hear the end of it.
Objection, Your Honor, to hearsay.
Yes, Your Honor, we're not offering Mr. Martini's statement that if she was indeed sick enough to be throwing up in a gutter, he'd never let her hear the end of it for the truth. Quite frankly, we find that to be hyperbole, and we're fine with the limiting instruction that the jury not take it for the truth. Instead, we're offering this statement for Mr. Martini's knowledge, his assumption, be it true or false, that Miss Petrillo was suffering from alcohol poisoning or had drank enough to be sick the next morning.
Response to that?
Your Honor, it is still our contention that this is a hearsay statement. It's being offered for the truth of the matter of whether or not Mr. Martini has knowledge that Ms. Petrillo was in the hospital and was suffering from alcohol poisoning.
May I respond?
Yes.
Your Honor, the statement from Mr. Martini is not that Genesis Petrillo probably has alcohol poisoning. The statement was, if she was sick somewhere, he would never let her hear the end of it. The truth of that statement is that if that was in fact the case, he would never let her hear the end of it. We're not offering this statement for that truth value. Like I said, we're fine with the limiting instruction. We find it to be hyperbole. We're offering it instead for the assumption, his knowledge that he was operating under, whether that's true or false. And therefore, because there's no truth value to offer, this is not hearsay.
When Mr. Martini was on the stand, we've already heard testimony from Mr. Martini about his knowledge of Genesis's alcohol consumption. Is that correct, or am I misremembering that?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. He did testify about that.
Okay, objection sustained.
Yes, Your Honor.
Permission to strike it from the record? Any answer that was elicited?
Only the statement from Mr. Martini out of the answer is stricken.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Osborne, were you with Mr. Martini when Angel Rodriguez returned from the hospital?
Yes, I was with him the whole time.
Did you ever see Angel Rodriguez and Mr. Martini speaking directly?
Not at all.
Did you ever see Mr. Martini ask Miss Rodriguez if Genesis had been poisoned?
No, again, I was with them the whole time.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Cross-exam?
Yes, Your Honor.
Floor is yours.
Ms. Osborne, you don't think Mr. Martini poisoned Ms. Petrillo, do you?
No, I don't know why a father would ruin their relationship with their child that way. So of course not.
In fact, Ms. Osborne, there's no amount of evidence that could convince you that Mr. Martini poisoned Ms. Petrillo. Isn't that correct?
You could say that.
And you observed conflicts between Ms. Petrillo and Mr. Martini during the course of planning the wedding, right?
I did.
Mr. Martini played you a voicemail that Ms. Petrillo had left him.
I heard a voicemail, yeah.
And you thought this voicemail was terrible.
Yeah, it was pretty saucy stuff.
And after Mr. Martini played that message, he said, one of these days, Genesis will drink the wrong thing and it will kill Genesis.
Yeah, he said that, but not quite like that.
But Ms. Osborne, those were the exact words that Mr. Martini said, right?
That's right.
Now, I want to talk about the rehearsal dinner. At the rehearsal dinner, you saw Mr. Martini and Ms. Petrillo get into a fight.
A disagreement?
And you characterized this disagreement as a boiling point.
Yeah, I would say this is a boiling point until the bottle of wine later on.
Right. After this boiling point, Mr. Martini gave Ms. Petrillo a bottle of wine.
Yes.
And when he gave her this bottle of wine, he said, I got this just for you, right?
Yes, but it was a sweet moment, so not quite like that again.
Well, Ms. Osborne, following that statement, he also said, but don't open it in front of other people. Isn't that correct?
Yes, he said that.
And you saw Ms. Petrillo open the bottle of wine and drink from it.
I saw her drink from it and then some. Yeah.
So you saw her drink from it. And later on, the morning of the wedding, you found out that Ms. Petrillo had passed away, right?
The morning of what would have been their wedding.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor. I just ask that Ms. Osborne be excused.
You're excused, Ms. Osborne. Thank you for your time today. Anything further from the defense?
No, Your Honor. The defense rests. We just asked for a brief recess. Oh, actually, never mind. We don't need a recess before closing statements.
I'd like to hear from the defense whether or not they rest.
Yes, Your Honor. The defense rests our case in chief, and like opposing counsel, I believe we would recommend a brief recess before moving into closings.
5 or 10 minutes. How much time do we have as far as?
Your Honor, we're starting to approach all loss. We're ready to proceed with closing statements if the plaintiff would be ready to, just in the interest of time.
I know we had a pretty significant 20 or 30 minute pause in the middle of this. Did tab extend our all loss due to that, or are we still stuck with the original time?
15, 16 minutes.
Your Honor, I was told that the tab room would be giving us 10 extra minutes. However, if timekeepers find it an issue, we're also prepared to move right into closings.
All right, how long do we have until all loss?
Your Honor, we have all loss. We have all loss at 5:10 currently and 20 minutes, and both sides have about 8 minutes left in their closing statements. So we would recommend not taking a break at this time.
Okay, I can give you 2 minutes if you would like. Otherwise, we'll just push right through unless you guys need a second to compose everything.
We can have like a minute, maybe like 2 minutes.
Okay, it's 4:51. Are we good at starting at 4:53?
Yes.
That sounds good. Your
That's fine with us, Your Honor.
All right. All right, if the plaintiff and defense want to come back, plaintiff, are you ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
Defense, are you ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, plaintiff, the floor is yours. It's my understanding that you do not have to reserve any time for a rebuttal.
That's right, Your Honor.
All right, so you can begin whenever you're ready.
On May 12th, 2019, Harper Martini's world came crashing down. You see, that's the day that Genesis Petrillo, the woman who was supposed to marry his son, called him. She said, "I'm taking your son to France. You'll never see him again." And members of the jury, Harper Martini was furious. And I'm sure, like a lot of parents, Harper Martini wanted the best for his son. He didn't want his son to move away. He wanted his son to take over the family business. But he didn't just want the best for his son, ladies and gentlemen. He wanted control. And on June 8th, 2019, he did everything to get it. And that's why we've brought a case of battery against the defendant, Harper Martini. Now, what that means is that we need to prove to you that Harper Martini caused harm to Genesis Petrillo and that he intended to do so. And we need to prove to you that it's more likely than not that he intentionally harmed Genesis. Now, members of the jury, we've met our burden. We've shown you that it's more likely than not that Harper Martini put pesticides into a wine bottle and gave that bottle to Genesis, intentionally causing her death. Now, of course, I can't just tell you that. I have to show it to you. And by doing so, I want you to remember 3 key points: the pain, the plan, and the poison. We might ask ourselves, why would Harper Martini want to kill his daughter-in-law? And folks, I think we've heard the answer over and over again today. He hated her. He hated her from the moment they met. When they got engaged, he was furious. And when she was going to take his son away, he couldn't take it. He told you himself that he knew he needed to stop the wedding. So he made a plan. And folks, he wasn't very quiet about that plan. You heard that he wrote a note to Genesis saying, you have until June 7th to call off the wedding, or I'll have to take you out of the picture the hard way. She didn't call off the wedding. Let's talk about how Harper took her out of the picture. You see, June 7th was the night of their rehearsal dinner. And you heard all about a specific bottle of wine that Harper gave Genesis. You heard that Harper gave Genesis specifically this bottle and said, don't open it in front of anyone. Angel Rodriguez told you that earlier that day, she saw Harper holding a pesticide container, and when she asked what it was for, well, the defendant admitted it's for Genesis. Investigative journalist Lonnie Paris also took the stand, and he told you today that he saw an empty bottle of pesticides right next to that bottle of Cara wine. He told you that that was the same bottle of wine next to that empty can of pesticides that was given to Genesis later that day. And you heard that Harper had a plan to get rid of the evidence. At 2:30 in the morning after the rehearsal dinner, he received a phone call. And he realized that Genesis went to the hospital, but he didn't go to the hospital. He didn't check in with anyone. He didn't call anyone. Instead, he went straight to her room alone and got rid of the evidence, tore off the label, and threw it in the trash. Now, members of the jury, Harper Martini came before you today and told you all sorts of excuses about why he did that. He wanted a memory from the wedding. He was just trying to get rid of the trash. But I want you to remember the last thing he said to you. Members of the jury, he was happy she died. And we know that the poison in that bottle of the wine was what caused her death. Dr. Jimin Kwan told you that herself. She told you that the wine had poison in it because they were mixed together in the stomach. And she told you that the symptoms that Genesis had were identical to pesticide poisoning. And she also brought forth lab results and told you that the lab results confirmed this. The lab results confirmed she was poisoned by pesticide. And folks, their own expert said it was the most likely conclusion that she was poisoned by pesticides. Now, counsel has talked all day about blood alcohol content. We've heard so much about the drinks she consumed and how it could have been alcohol poisoning, but folks, I just want to make one thing clear. There is one measurement of her BAC. It was 0.16. That is half of what is necessary for alcohol poisoning. Members of the jury, our own expert came forward and told you that it's not possible for it to have gone above the threshold of 0.25 needed to induce alcohol poisoning. Their theory isn't possible. Now, folks, we've talked a lot today about Casey Soto and his father. But I want you to think just for a moment about Genesis and her father. Ladies and gentlemen, Genesis's father will never get to see her walk down the aisle. Genesis's father is never going to get to hold her hand before she got married. Genesis's father will never get to see her buy her first home, get a promotion, start a family. Members of the jury, because of what the defendant did, Genesis's father's life is forever changed. Members of the jury, if there's one thing opposing counsel and I agree on, it's that this case is a tragedy. This court can't work miracles, but it can bring justice for someone like Genesis's father. Because members of the jury, he needed control. Thank you.
Thank you. The floor is for the defense for closing. You may begin when you're ready.
Thank you. Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court, counsel, members of the jury. Ms. Melcott is right that this case is a tragedy. When a tragedy occurs, it's only natural to want somebody to blame. It's hard to stomach the idea that a young woman could die on the morning of what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. And that it could be the result of an accident. That it could be alcohol poisoning and not a pesticide-laced bottle of wine that took Genesis Petrillo away from her fiancé and her family. So it's easier to have somebody to blame. But while it may not look like it at the present moment, this is still a court of law. And so we can't assign blame when the evidence doesn't support it. And when we examine the evidence that we've seen throughout this trial, we're left with these three key questions. The same key questions that Ms. Lamerson told you we still wouldn't have answers to at the beginning of this trial. And she was right. There's so much that we just don't know. What was Genesis Petrillo's peak blood alcohol content on June 8th? We asked every single witness, all 6 of them, plaintiffs, our own, do you know what her peak BAC was? Do you know how much she had to drink? No one had an answer, so we just don't know. How was that bottle of Cara wine contaminated by pesticides? Before she drank it? In the dumpster when it had been thrown away with the rest of the pesticide canisters? We asked every single witness. No one could tell us when that happened, so we just don't know. How was that bottle of wine contaminated by pesticides? We asked every single witness, did you see Harper Martini put pesticides in that bottle? How did it happen? No one had an answer to that question, so we just don't know. And the fact that the plaintiff hasn't been able to answer these 3 key questions, well, that's a problem, members of the jury. It's a problem because the plaintiff came here today with a very particular burden, a burden that we, the defense, did not share. See, the plaintiff had to prove by a preponderance of the evidence, meaning it's more likely than not, more likely than any alternative explanation or theory, more likely than our theory of alcohol poisoning, that Genesis Petrillo died because Harper Martini is liable for battery. And to prove their case of battery, well, they had to prove 3 different elements to you, each by a preponderance of the evidence. First, well, they had to prove that Mr. Martini acted, that he put a lethal dose of pesticides in the bottle of wine that he gave to Genesis Petrillo. Second, well, they had to prove that he did so with intent to harm Ms. Petrillo. And third, that but for that alleged act, Genesis Petrillo would not have suffered harm. In other words, that she would still be alive today. But the problem with the plaintiff's case is that because they couldn't answer those 3 key questions, because there's so much that we still just don't know, well, they couldn't prove those 3 elements of battery and meet their burden. And here's what I mean by that. Let's start with that first element of battery, the act. How do we know that Mr. Martini put pesticides in that bottle? Well, to prove their claim and to answer that question, it's only reasonable that the plaintiff tell us how that happened and when it happened. Now, they told us today that a forensic test found that that bottle of wine eventually tested positive for pesticide residue. But when did it happen? Because to prove their case, they had to demonstrate that that bottle was contaminated before Genesis Petrillo ever drank it. But we heard today from Mr. Martini that the same dumpster that bottle ended up in is the dumpster that contained pesticide residue, those canisters that they use on the winery. So because we didn't see any evidence that proves whether it happened one way or the other, we still just don't know, and they never answered the question of when, so they couldn't prove that first element of their claim. What's more, they couldn't prove how it happened, because they brought the testimony of Angel Rodriguez, who saw Mr. Martini with a canister of pesticides walking toward the kitchen. And Angel Rodriguez actually had to admit on cross-examination that the pesticides being for Genesis, well, that was a joke, and they were actually for a cockroach problem. And they also brought us the testimony of Lonnie Paris, who told us that he also saw the pesticides in the kitchen. But neither of those witnesses actually saw Mr. Martini put pesticides in that bottle. So they want you to assume, and this is a big ask, they want you to assume that in the time between when those two witnesses saw Mr. Martini, well, he must have somehow injected pesticides into that sealed bottle of wine. But if that were the case, shouldn't the plaintiff have been able to show us a syringe? Shouldn't they have been able to show us evidence that that sealed bottle was tampered with? We just didn't see that evidence. We don't even know that it exists. There's too much that we don't know, so they haven't met their burden by proving that first element. That brings us to the second, that element, intent. And it's important not to get confused here, members of the jury, because what the plaintiff brought us today was his motive. Mr. Martini's alleged motive, that he needed control, that he was furious. Motive is not one of those elements that they had to prove today. And the fact that he was happy that Genesis Petrillo was no longer in the picture, well, no matter how terrible you may find that to be, members of the jury, that's still not evidence that he acted. It's still not evidence that helps the plaintiff prove those elements or answer these questions, and so they haven't proved their case. And finally, that third element, that but for the alleged act, Ms. Petrillo would still be with us today. Well, Dr. Cannon told us that we can't know that for certain, because so many witnesses, Mr. Martini, Angel Rodriguez, Claire Osborne, they all told us that she was drinking heavily that night. And that when her peak BAC was found 2 hours after she'd stopped drinking, well, it's possible that it had been high enough in those 2 hours to reach a lethal point. Because we can't rule that out. Because there's so many questions that just aren't answered, you cannot find Harper Martini liable. Thank you.
We have time for a rebuttal.
We have about 25 seconds, Your Honor.
All right, the floor is a plaintiff if they so choose to use that remaining time.
Yes, Your Honor, I'll use the 25 seconds. May I proceed? Members of the jury, we know that her peak BAC couldn't have been high enough to kill her. We know there was an empty pesticide container right next to the wine, and we know that container and the bottle tested positive. And members of the jury, Genesis knew. On the day she died, she said, "I think Harper's going to kill me." Members of the jury, she knew he wanted control, and so do we. Find him liable.
All right, thank you very much. Judges, it looks like we have about a minute if you want to go ahead and wrap up those scorecards and get them submitted. And judges, when those are submitted and you're ready for comments, you can go ahead and turn your camera on.
I'm having trouble submitting mine, so sorry for the delay.
No worries. All right, Melissa, we're good? Cool. I'll be very brief. I know that you guys have heard from me a lot already today, so I'll give most of the time to Melissa and Amanda. My name is Ashley DeMuzio. I am a criminal defense attorney here in Forsyth County. I graduated from Wake and I'm currently working at the public defender's office here. I did mock trial through high school, college, and law school, and I'm currently an assistant coach with the law school teams. So I really enjoy this, and you guys put on a really great show today, especially considering the fact that we're not in a courtroom, but rather on Zoom. I was very impressed. I assume that this is one of your first tournaments, if not the first one that you guys have been to. And I was very impressed with the way that you guys kept eye contact, even though that meant looking at the camera and not actually looking at the person on the screen, and how you use your limited space to really show movement and to show tone and to show voice and everything. I did type out individual comments, and I type a lot faster than I write. So I was able to pretty much get everything down that I wanted to say. So I'm just going to give one overall comment. And that is, during pretrial matters, I said that I wanted you guys to let me know when you wanted to be heard outside the presence of the jury. So every single objection argument, except for one, was made in the presence of the jury. So just keep that in mind moving forward, that if a judge says that, be very, very careful about choosing what you do and do not want in front of the jury, because I'm sure that a lot of those arguments you did not want them to hear, but they ended up hearing anyway. So with that, I will pass it along to Melissa and Amanda.
Okay, I can go next and I'll be brief as well. My name is Amanda Manzano. I'm a third-year law student at Wake Forest. I'm on the national trial team at Wake and will be in the Bronx DA's office next year after I graduate. First of all, very impressed by both teams. Such a high caliber of professionalism, knowledge of the rules of evidence, very impressive. So congratulations to you guys. I can also tell that both teams are very passionate about what they're doing here. That really came through, and your work and passion really paid off. Just really one overarching comment that pertains to objections. First of all, when a team is making an objections, maintain decorum while you're hearing their objection, even if you think it's the most unfounded and ridiculous objection you've ever heard. Try not to make any faces or throw your arms up in the air, especially on Zoom, because you're really front and center at all times. Otherwise, when you're making an objection, there were really well argued objections today, but think about at times whether or not you need to make that objection. Just because you can doesn't really mean you should. Think about whether or not it hurts your case. Because there were times where I felt that they weren't really hurting you, but you would spend several minutes arguing an objection nonetheless. But great job, you all did very well today.
Hi everyone, I'm Melissa Malone. I did mock trial in high school and then in college, and then I didn't do it in law school, and I did moot court instead. I'm an immigration attorney in Charlotte, and just always really enjoyed mock trial. But my big overarching comment, I would say, and it kind of echoes what Amanda was saying, is just to really pick your battles. I noticed several things as well where there were like several back and forth moments over things that just shouldn't have taken up the time that they did, would have been better spent elsewhere. And I don't know exactly what was happening between the two cases in chief, but take your battles might have applied to that as well. So just keep that in mind as you guys continue. But again, really impressed, great job, especially with all of the tech. things that you were working with. I know you have a lot to deal with, even when it's in person. And so it was impressive to see you all juggling even more things with all the tech. So great job.
All right, and I just want to add on to the end of that, if any of you guys want to ask me questions directly about the round or have any questions about law school or the criminal defense field in general, feel free to shoot me a chat and I'll share with you my contact information so that we can have a brief chat about that. But other than that, unless Amanda and Melissa, you guys have anything else to say, go eat, prep for tomorrow. Hopefully you get a decent amount of sleep tonight. And great job again, guys.
Thank you very much, all of you, for your time. It's really helpful for us to have great judges. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.